Good morning. Morning. We're going to be looking at another parable. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 25 today. If you want to join me, it will come on the screen as well. It's called Entrusted. I've called the message Entrusted. Entrusted. Let's have a look at what it says. This is from Matthew chapter 25, beginning at verse 14. I've picked out some highlights and put them on the screen, but if you want to check, I'm not making it up. Just have a little look yourself. Again, Jesus said, it would be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents bought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I've gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I've gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful with a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Come, share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew you were a hard man, harvesting where you've not sown and gathering where you've not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. So you knew I harvest where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with some interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has the 10. Everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Entrusted. 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 This is a fascinating parable, isn't it? I wouldn't end it like that. But Jesus is the boss, and that's how he ends it. So that's how we end it. Entrusted. First of all, I want to just pull out, it's interesting here in Matthew chapter 25 that Jesus tells 3 parables that are about the absence of God from people's lives. 3 parables about God being far off. The first one is about 10 bridesmaids, 10 virgins. The second one is about the talents. The third is about the sheep and the goats. And in each of these situations, Jesus says the master or the bridegroom or the Son of Man is not present in a situation. Now, we're a church who loves the presence of God. We love it when God comes close. We live in a world in which we want God to be with us in every single moment. And yet what Jesus presents us with actually in these moments is a theology of God's absence. What do we do when it feels like God is not present with me right now? Now, don't mishear me, because Jesus said, I'm with you always, even to the very end of the age. And don't mishear me, because God says in God we live and breathe and have our being. But there isn't a sense in which Jesus is preparing his people in this passage to say there will be times when it feels like I am far off. And what will you do when God seems to be absent in your life? That is a big question that Jesus actually poses to the church. Maybe he's posing it to you today. It's funny, isn't it? Because when we come across people, we say, it feels like, where's God in this? And they think that's a question that must mean that therefore God isn't either real or something's wrong with a theology. But actually Jesus says the question of where is God in this is a question that the church should be asking over and over and over again. And it's a good question. And the answer is sometimes, even though Jesus is with us always, even though in God we live and breathe and have our being, there's a sense in which the God has gone far off. He's on a trip. He's far away. It's so alien to us, isn't it? But read Matthew chapter 25 and 3 parables which talk about God not being fully present. Do you remember the first time you were ever left home alone? Do you remember that? Do you remember that moment? I remember, I think I was about 14. I have two brothers, and my parents went away. They went away. And it's the first time in the home. First time in the home, and my parents weren't there. And do you remember, did you ever have that? You can remember what that was like? First time you wake up, and it's the same as it always was. Same bed, and yet you're like, what do I do? You remember you kind of get out of bed and you kind of look around and you open the door where your mum would be sleeping. Like, no, there is actually nobody there. I'm actually in this home right now, entrusted with its care. I remember my brothers and I played cricket in the living room and broke my mum's favourite ornament. It was a great shot, however. It knocked the head off. Entrusted in God's absence is fascinating. And Jesus, what he says is when in this moment when you're entrusted, he says, what do you do? Well, what do you do when you're left home alone? You think, well, what would my mom do in this situation? What would my dad do in this situation? The dog is present. What do we do to look after the dog? I do what my dad used to do. I let the dog into the garden first thing in the morning. I give it its food. You see, it's entrusted, but not trusted with nothing. It's entrusted with you've seen, you know. God's given you his book. They've seen Jesus present. And even more than that, it's almost like an image that Jesus presents as God on Skype. You know, like you're home and you're like, oh, let me just Skype in to my mum. Mum, where's that thing, that dish we use for cooking those sausages? Where is that? Oh, and you see, this is the image that Jesus is communicating. I think it's alien to us. I think we just want to always talk about the presence of God, but the parables are here. Entrusted. Do we do what he's left us to do, even when he feels far off? And I want to tell you, I want to be somebody who follows Jesus, that you have no clue in my life this week whether I've really felt God present or whether I've not felt him at all. I want to be somebody, when you look at me, you see how I act, how I interact with other people, you see how I engage with worship. You're thinking to yourself, is he really feeling the Holy Spirit now or not? And I hope you don't notice any difference. Because that's what it's like to be entrusted, somebody who's entrusted. This last week, I've prayed my prayers and I've read my book, and I don't think I've really felt much from the Lord at all. But hopefully I've still done what I do every week. Entrusted. Entrusted with God's absence. Isn't that an interesting idea? Entrusted with God's stuff. Entrusted with God's stuff. The people aren't just, they're left, the three servants, they're left with God's stuff. Here's some stuff I trust you with. What are you going to do with it? Here's 5 for you. What are you going to do with it? Here's 2 for you. What are you going to do with it? Here's 1 for you. What are you going to do with it? Entrusted with God's stuff. Now, we live in a very, very interesting moment in society. In our culture at the moment, we certainly since the wars, but even before that, from the 1830s particularly, the idea became more and more common that actually, yes, this God was far off, and he's a hard man. He's a hard man. Look at this. He's a hard man. And the kind of the parable of the third servant is like, you're a hard man. You've given me this, but I better just eat, drink, and be merry, because I better just make the most of whatever's in my hand. This money, this bit that I've been given, this stuff that you've given me, I'm just going to make the most of it, because who knows where God is. And even more than that, recently, a big move to say, is there even a landlord at all? Is there even a God? This stuff that I have, I just use it however I want. I just do whatever I want with this, whatever works best for me. Entrusted with God's stuff is a question of, is this God's stuff at all, is the question. And I think we just come across this over and over again. Is this God's body? I regularly look in the mirror and think that's the body of a God. I mean, I look at and I think this is a gift from the Lord. Do you do that? You should. You should look in the mirror and think, this is a gift from the Lord. He's entrusted me with this hand and this brain and this stomach. He's entrusted me with this stomach. He's entrusted me with this. Some of you have been entrusted with a very large set of things, stomach. He entrusted us. He entrusts us. And even at this moment, it's when we look and we think this is God's stuff, and then there's a move to say it's not God's stuff, just do whatever you want with what you've got. At the same time as that, you can tell in the heart of so many of us, there's this yearning growing. Do you notice it all across society? People are like, but we don't want to just mistreat the world. In fact, there's a move of, especially among the younger generation, they look at the older generation and say, you've just abused this planet. Look what you've done to it. You're kind of just relentless consumerism and materialism. Like, I don't want to be like that. And there's a desire to actually steward the planet well. And I believe that's a work of God. We want to be, we've been entrusted with this. Now the question is, but who's entrusted us with this planet? Because so often that doesn't it points us, but are we following where the arrow points us to? All the yearning to see our environment cared for, ultimately it points to this is given to us. We've been entrusted with God's stuff. And what I think we see, and what I certainly see in my life at different times, and in the lives of many people who follow Jesus and many people who don't follow Jesus, is that they're either frozen by falsehood. What they do with God's stuff, they're even frozen with falsehood. They're even frozen like, oh, I won't, it's this idea either that God's not present, or God's not that kind, or that they doesn't really make any difference because they haven't got enough. And so they get frozen by this falsehood, actually, that God's not entrusted them really with anything. Frozen by falsehood. That's certainly what the third servant does. He looks and he says, look, you're just not a very nice guy, and I just couldn't be bothered. Just couldn't be bothered. He's been frozen by the falsehood, or scattergun spending. Scattergun spending is the other one. I just see so often. We're trying to teach our kids how to use money, and one of our kids, he loves FIFA. Anybody like FIFA soccer? I must admit, I quite enjoy a bit of FIFA. You know what I'm talking about on the PlayStation or FIFA. And he asked for his friends to get him vouchers for FIFA points. So like he got £10 worth from somebody and £10 from somebody. It's 20 quid worth of FIFA points. He was so excited about this, and he bought himself FIFA points. And it's just nonsense, right? It's just numbers on a screen that you then trade to be able to buy a pack, and in the pack you might get a player that you think is going to be a great player for your team. It's very clever, actually, marketing technique. Anyway, so he bought this pack, 20 quid of FIFA points. And he can buy like 5 jumbo packs or whatever it was, 27 things in the packs. And, there's this moment where he's like, yes. He's like, oh, imagine if I get Messi. Imagine if I get this, And he bought the pack. First pack, rubbish. Somebody played for Swansea or something like that. Rubbish. He got through to the last pack. The last pack. The best person he got was James Milner. I mean, I said to him, what a waste of 20 quid, eh? How do you feel about that? He's like, I'm gutted, Dad. It's like scattergun spending, right? I said, get used to this, learn this lesson. I said, I'm so pleased this has happened. Because if at least you learn now, scattergun spending doesn't often get you what you want. It's not a great use of what you've been entrusted. And actually, the mentality is, what happens so often is scattergun spending means we think we haven't got enough. I suspect in this room, I just want to change your perspective. You've been entrusted with God's stuff, not only the body you have, but the likelihood is that God entrusts you with £1 million through the course of your life. Through the course of your life, God will probably entrust you with £1 million, because the average salary in Croydon is £30,000 a year. The average salary. You're just trying to work out, where am I at with that? Average salary, $30,000 a year, which means you take home $24,000 a year. You mean take-home pay would be £24,000 a year. And if you worked the average working life, that would mean you'd have taken home £1.1 million on an average salary. So we've got many secret millionaires here. Did you know it? God's made you a millionaire. Even if you're on basic minimum wage, you still end up with something like £600,000 over the course of your life. See, God's entrusted a lot of stuff to you. Did you know that? He's actually entrusted a lot of stuff to you. So what are you going to do with the stuff he's entrusted to you? And the parable here this week talks about the parable of talents, intentional investment of God's stuff. Intentional investment. And next week we're going to look at the sheep and the goats, which talks about the casual generosity. Just develop casual generosity with the stuff that God gives you. Just be generous and you don't even realize it. You don't even realize it. Just casual generosity. So here's just investing God's stuff in God's stuff. Will you be somebody who invests God's stuff in God's stuff? That's the invitation of the parable. God's entrusting you with some stuff, so will you use it for his stuff? Did you notice it's in the context of care? These are servants who are looked after, they're housed, they're fed, they're watered. Jesus says the same to you. He says you don't have to worry about what you'll eat, what you'll drink, what you'll wear. That you're looked after. You're in the house of God. You're in the context of care. He gives you the stuff to look after as he cares for you. Secondly, the thing that Jesus recommends is deliberate investment of what he gives to you. Deliberate investment of what he gives to you. The third thing he shows is there's freedom. There's freedom of opportunity. We don't even, this guy with 5 did this in this way and this guy did 2 in that way. There's immense freedom from the Lord. He cares for you. He asks you to intentionally invest things, but there's freedom of opportunity. And did you know money does actually lead to happiness? Did you notice? They invest the money that the landlord gives them, and the Jesus is like, oh, well done, you've used it really well. Come and share in my happiness. Come and share in my happiness. Did you know that? Isn't that amazing? So actually, the investing in God's things, you entrust in stuff to you, then you can use it. And it actually, as you use it and you invest God's stuff in God's stuff, it actually leads to you sharing in God's happiness. And you think, yeah, I've spent that well. I've done that well. I see this is good. God's stuff is going well. Am I with you so far? I mean, is this too many alien concepts I'm throwing at you today? So I just want to encourage us. Why don't we invest in God's stuff? Now, if you're here and you're not a Christian, which you might be, then you can, do what you want with your money. But I really encourage you to think, what am I doing with my money? Maybe I've been entrusted with this money. Maybe this is something that, how did I grow up in this place and be in this room right now that I would have this stuff given to me? I wonder, what am I going to do with my money? And I just think, maybe I want to invest in stuff that really matters. And as you look at the one who gave it to you and you think, I want to invest in stuff that really matters, maybe that will lead you to think, I wonder what Jesus says about money. I just want to consider that. If you follow Jesus and you think, yeah, I want to invest the stuff he's put in my life, this £1 million or whatever it is over the course of my life, my body, my energy, I want to invest it in stuff. I just want to encourage you. I want to ask you, would you consider giving money to this church? Investing in this community of people that God has brought together. Now, we don't believe it's our creation. I mean, we currently are the people who lead this thing, but it will go on for many, many generations after us. That's our prayer, and it's God's thing. And we believe God establishes churches to pursue his purposes in a particular area. And there's many churches in Croydon and all over. We think, I just want to encourage you. And so we're going to just talk a little bit. And if you're not part of this church, just bear with us. You can just look and see. But this is what we feel God's stuff is for this church in this town. And we just want to say, hey, why don't we get behind this and put our stuff in it? We, as a family, Leslie and I, we just want to invest our money. We just want to invest. Jesus says you should care for your family. He says you're worse than an unbeliever if you don't look after your family. So you should care for your family. Make provision for a pension. Invest in stuff that counts. But also just invest in the kingdom. Invest in the kingdom stuff. That's what you want. In God's stuff. And a church is a great way to do that. So how do we use our... this is what we do with the money that you give. This is what we hope to do this year. So we try and give more than 10% away as a church. So Vineyard Churches UK and Ireland, we give 5% of what you give to them. And Vineyard Churches, 150 Vineyard Churches in this country. And many of them are doing wonderful things in their community. We try and give around about 10% to our English school. And that really funds the salary. And do you know the English school that we run on 2 days a week in Croydon Central Library? And we get probably on a given week like 70 people who come in, and just story after story of people who are isolated because they don't speak English. They're disconnected from other people, and they can just walk into a room where they'll be befriended and loved and embraced. And so they get conversational English classes, and then after the classes, there's an opportunity, if they want to stay and look at the Bible. And I know this is a few months old now, but the team were telling me they had a week where sat around the Bible was an Iranian guy and an Iraqi guy sat next to each other, and they'd probably fought against one another in the Iran-Iraq war, and they were sat next to one another in Croydon Central Library discussing the Bible. We love it. We love it. Don't you just love it? Number of people from the English school have just been enabled to just give that little bit of confidence. Often it's just a little bit of confidence. They can go and apply for a job and get a job, or fill out their forms they need to do this, that, or the other, advance on their visas, get their housing sorted, etc. We'd love as a church to give away a little bit each year to a church in a less well-off part of the world. We'd love to support a church that's working maybe in a persecuted part of the world, or maybe where the church is just struggling. We'd love to do that. At the moment, we kind of have done that a little bit, but we'd love to do that more. As a church, we want to, as you know, we feel God's calling us. It would be great to get a building. We could do more all through the week with a building. That costs probably about £1.5 million. And later this year, we're going to say, hey, are we up for this? And there'll be an invitation to say, do you want to provide? Do you want to put some money into that? But I just want to focus. If we just click onto the next one. This just shows you the way it all works out. And actually you can see the vast majority of what we do is investing in the key things that we feel God has asked us to do. Raising sons and daughters. We want to see a whole generation of people in Croydon raised up that they can meet their full potential in Jesus. This is what we want. And if you were here at the start, you'd have seen the stuff that increasingly we're doing with the youth. I think there's 27 young people, 28 teenagers who went to Carity Wood last weekend. Most weeks there's that number, if not a few more, next door. We want to invest in these guys. It's a hard time to be a teenager. You may have seen on the 28th of January, Lewis Johnson, 16 years old, was stabbed just around the corner, stabbed to death at East Croydon Station. It's not an easy time to be a teenager in our world. We want to invest and raise up sons and daughters. You hopefully saw Elijah and you saw Tessa. These are not just teenagers. We've got many children. We think we have about 180 under 18s who at some point would say they're connected to this church. We hear of many families, and the mums say, "Oh, my kid begs to come to church, but I can't be bothered to get out of bed on a Sunday morning." Wouldn't it be amazing if we could just do more, to reach and raise up more sons and daughters? We invest money on that stuff. We want to multiply leaders. We feel God's stuff is to multiply leadership. Is Sal in here? Where is Sal? Oh, look, just stand up a second. Look, we want more of this. We want more of him. Sal's been working with us a day a week. We're training him in leadership. He's a great leader. But it takes time and money to invest in people. Leaders don't just spring up. You invest in them deliberately. And as a church, we feel God's calling us to invest in leaders, to make space. Not many people can just not work. So they need to be provided some money to help them give up the time. We also conscious is not just leadership within church. We also want to raise up leadership for Croydon. We want to raise up people who run businesses and involved with schools and involved with all kinds of organizations all across Croydon. And so in 2 weeks' time, in 2 Sundays' time, we've invited Lord Hastings to come. And he's going to preach in the morning, and he's going to do a lunch at our house for people, and we can an entrepreneurship lunch. So if you just click on for the there we go. So Lord Michael Hastings, he started his career trying to bring employment and help to people who worked in inner cities. He then worked for the BBC for a bit. He worked for GMTV for a bit. He was gradually worked his way up and became one of the board members at the BBC, Director of Public Affairs. He then moved across, worked with many other organizations, was head of corporate responsibility for KPMG most recently. He also works with the World Economic Forum. He works on advising about business to UNICEF and promoting entrepreneurship. And he's the Chancellor of, Chancellor of Regent's University in London. So he's quite busy. He's quite busy. But we want to encourage you, if you've run your own business, if you've any interest in whatsoever in starting a business, if you want to be somebody who actually is able to influence others through what you do Monday to Sunday, we'd love to invite you. Come for lunch. And you can just draw on the wisdom of this man. Now we also have Lakis. Where's Lakis? Is he in here? Yeah, there he is. Lakis is going to chair the lunch, and increasingly we just want to champion people like Lakis who he's just got a wealth of experience in running businesses, like working out how to make decisions, to be a leader in an economic context and in a community context. So if you're interested in those things, please come. Let us know you're coming so we make sure you have food. Send me an email. We want to raise up leaders. We want to multiply leaders. We want to see life-changing groups as a church. We want to see life-changing groups. We want to... Rob and Emma, who are they in here? Rob's probably working shifts. He does a lot of shift work, and she's in Shooting Stars. They run a group in New Addington, and they just, as a group, increasingly, they just try and reach out to their community. They try and create environments where people can just come in and have their lives changed. And Rob and Emma will, every time we see them, just be like, we prayed for this person who has had this problem. We prayed for that person who had that problem. We asked for healing for this person. We just chatted and sat and listened to this person. They live on a road called Cudham Drive, which a few years ago was featured on Neighbours from Hell on the TV. And they've just gone and they've just chosen to let's be a life-changing group, a presence on this street. We love it. We want to love Croydon. As a church, we want to love Croydon. We want to empower people to carry the kingdom of Jesus all through the week in all of their lives. We love it when we hear stories of people being invited by their friends. Lorraine was just baptized just 2 weeks ago because Mary invited her. Equally, Nikki, who was baptized the previous time, I think, or the time before, because somebody just invited her. We want to love Croydon. We want to invite people into church contexts, and things like nativity shows. And at Easter, we're going to have like a petting zoo for the kids to come and give out free food and these things cost money, right? So we just ask, would you invest in this stuff? Would you invest in this stuff? Culture of worship. We want everything we do to honor Jesus. We want to be a space where people have life-changing encounters with God, where they see how great God is, how much He loves them, how much He's for them. And we want to be a diverse people. I was going to talk about Dorothy, who was meant to be leading worship this week, but she's sick, so she's not here. But we want to increasingly invest in worship. Like all this stuff, we want to see more. We want to see more people leading worship. We run Sunday morning and Sunday evening services, and we spend money on that stuff. We want to see an environment created where people can encounter Jesus. And the truth is to put on the teas and coffees and to hire the buildings. We spend 40 grand a year on just hiring schools and rooms. I mean, this stuff we want to do it well. We wish you could do it better. I mean, we'd love to do it better, but it just costs money, right? It's just the honest truth. So we'd love to encourage you. We think this is a great way to intentionally invest in kingdom stuff. And if you're part of another church, we encourage you. It's a great way to invest in God's stuff. It's to give money. And if you're not part of a church, you can still, Oh, well, if you want to. But it says in the Bible, it's really, really clear that God loves a cheerful giver. So if you we won't manipulate you to give. That's why we don't pass a bucket, because we don't want to manipulate you, but we do want to encourage you. If you can give with a chuckle, if you can invest the money and oh, yes, I'm going to share in my Father's happiness when it all comes around, then give. We, as a family, we just want to give, There's many different ways, so it's very, just practically, it's incredibly helpful if you give by a standing order. I know it's not possible for everybody, but it's really helpful because it just means we know how much is coming in and we can make strategic decisions about investment. If you could do that, that's amazing. If you don't want to do that, listen, there's no pressure. There's no pressure. There's a table at the back every week. We'd love you to just, if you want to give, give. And if you don't want to give, don't give. But we encourage you to give. That's just the way we do it. Standing order, you can give by cash, check, on the website increasingly. We're just trying to make it easier and easier. If you can think of ways to make it easy to do it, then let us know. But the key thing from this is I want to tell you that we have a Father who is kind, who's provided us with immense stuff. Every one of us. You've been given life. You've been given access to God. You've been given energy. You've been given money by Him. And Jesus says, why don't you invest it in stuff that really counts? Why don't you invest it in Him? And that's what Jesus ultimately did for us, right? He invested what little He had. And He really had little compared to what He could have had, right? He owned all the cattle on 1,000 hills, and He was born as a refugee in a poor part of one small country. And He invested the little He had in pursuing the glory, and we are still living on the benefit of His decision to take what He had and to invest. And a final thing on that, I just want to stress, this isn't about total amount given. This isn't about money total, because about the widow. You know about that. Jesus, the thing Jesus does, which is so freeing for you, there's freedom. Don't forget there's freedom, is that just take a small amount. He's like, oh, this is more. She's given more than what the others gave because she gave out of the poverty that she had. So this isn't about who's the best or who's got the most. It's just about, let's choose to invest in what we've been entrusted by the Lord. Should we pray?